Meet me after slashing your wrist, or at the end if you so insist. I'm persistent when told to cease and desist with this blasphemous shit.
Colossally, probably covered in fluff. Forgive me. That's what happens when you have rabbits and you wear black. Alright. Oh no. Set myself on fire. Welcome. If you're new here, welcome back. If you've been here a while, I wanted to answer a couple of comments, a couple of specific comments. I've released a couple of videos. As far as I'm concerned, they're not controversial videos, but they can be taken controversially because the subjects are quite sensitive. Because it's sensitive, I feel a lot of society is quick to judge on emotion and not on logic or morality. Yeah. So the videos in question one was regarding dun 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 Shamima Begum, and the other one was regarding dun 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 the NHS nurse strike that's about to happen. Subscriber named Liverpool Lass. Red Liverpool Lass. Red Liverpool Lass. She typed very passionately. I believe she meant every word she said. She never attempted to be insulting, but she also gave me the impression that she was let down, which, I'll be honest, kind of bothered me. Like, I'm so grateful for the conversation, because that's all these things are, the conversation. In a marketplace of ideas, as Ben Shapiro would say. Even though Ben Shapiro doesn't want to have conversations. But I am far too empathetic to think I let somebody down. So we'll start gently. I did a video on the nurses. I released that today. And she gave me a long reply, which I genuinely appreciate. To be able to resolve any kind of issues, you need to be prepared to listen to the other side. You need to be prepared to listen to what the complaints are. Not dismiss complaints as if they're not justified. Everyone's complaint is justified. And together, we find common ground. With regards to the nurses, she starts off by saying nurses are on good money. My cousin is a nurse, is on 32 grand without overtime. The average wage is 27, so their wage is above average. Technically, none of the things you said were wrong at all. But what I will say is I feel it's missing a bit of context. As you can see, band 2 entry-level pay is £10.37. You'll be on £10.37 an hour for a minimum of 2 years before you can get a pay increase. And that pay increase, as you can see, will go up to £10.90. That's not to say you can't get up to 34, 38, maybe even 40 grand somewhere along the line. But it is to say you will not walk into anywhere near that kind of money. Thank you to your cousin, by the way. I love anybody who spends their life helping others. Very few things in our society can compare to such behaviour, which is why these things burn at me. So yeah, band 2 starting pay £10.37, band 3 £11.11, band 4 £12.25. They're rubbish wages. So that is well below average. Arguably one of the most important jobs in our society. Yes, it seems like it's possible to get to your cousin's status, but it also seems like you're going to have to make a lot of sacrifices to get there. COVID exposed how selfish this world is. Surely we're going to find less and less people willing to make those sacrifices in order to look after other people without no encouragement. And the encouragement would be a living wage. The encouragement would be having the resources to actually do the job you want to do the job society needs them to do.
But it is important that we recognise, as you will know as a nurse, the demands on the NHS are increasing all the time. We recognise the work that the NHS staff do, but
nurses get paid less and less.
And this was always the question about how to make sure they had more rewarding career options, but also, could also, increase their salary or go off to Lidl or whatever.
She then follows it up with an understandable set of talking points. And to be honest, these talking points are the reason why these conversations are so hard. So if they go on strike, along with ambulance drivers, people will die. The government has already said they will go to category 1 cases, but category 2, such as heart attack, stroke, will have a longer wait, and anything less than category 2 will not get an ambulance at all. So an elderly person falling downstairs, or someone having an epileptic fit or diabetic relapse, will not get an ambulance. People will die guaranteed. Again, that's all correct. But again, that's the government and that's the media using sensitive subjects to distract you.
They kept saying to us, we've got one doctor. What do you want us to do? We've got no beds available. What do you want us to do? We've got no space for him. What do you want us to do? Complain to the big people. Don't complain to us.
This is the grief that comes with bearing a child. 10 days ago, Yusuf became ill. His GP described antibiotics for a sore throat, but Yusuf became much sicker. He was seen and sent home by doctors at Rotherham General Hospital.
This is 2 weeks before he died.
2 weeks before he died. Such a lovely kid.
But when his condition deteriorated further, his family begged for Yusuf to be admitted to hospital.
We just lost a beautiful child, and it's not his fault. We begged and begged and begged for help. We couldn't get it. We just did not get the help we wanted, or we needed, or we should have got.
The family managed to have Yusuf seen by specialists at Sheffield Children's Hospital, but it was too late. His infection had spread to his lungs, and on Monday he died from pneumonia.
If Yusuf, who's passed away, if he can save one child, we're happy. We do not want anybody to go through this, and we're just asking them to please listen to people.
My condolences to Yusuf's family, and I salute your bravery, using your pain to try and help others. Thank you. Our hospitals, our entire social service system is overrun. Sometimes you can go to a hospital, there won't be a bed, which is a lie. There actually is a bed, more often than not. It's just there's no staff to manage said bed. If you're lucky and unlucky at the same time, your condition might be serious enough that they're forced to find you a bed in another hospital, maybe in another city, but that's an awkward situation to be in.
One of the country's leading paediatric consultants told me that while the crisis in adult healthcare was recognised, it was probably the same, if not worse, for children. He said today there were no intensive care beds for children available anywhere south of Stoke, and a sick child had to be transferred from Wales to his hospital in London. NHS England has told Sky News it has written to trusts warning of a potentially record rise in demand for treatment of respiratory viruses. It comes after we reported a national shortage of paediatric ICU beds across the country.
The Conservative Party are happy to be shifting out blame, but they haven't offered up many solutions. They've just stayed silent on that front. I guess they're waiting for it all to collapse and then they can sell it off. But what do we do? In the real world, what do we do? So, as the report just said there, there's one ICU paediatric bed in the country. So what happens if 2 kids have life-threatening accidents tomorrow? There will be another Yusuf. Thing is, tomorrow won't be the last day. There'll be more cases the day after that, and the day after that. So young Yusuf, poor little soul, and his family, who are going through the worst pain imaginable, will not be the only ones. Sadly, that's nothing to do with the strike. If they don't do the strike, no one's going to fight for them. No one is fighting for them, and people will die. And still the government are saying, nope, Nope, nope. This is how they treat the common people.
Working as a nurse for 26 years, do the Tories expect our support in the light of another 1% pay increase?
But it is important that we recognise, as you will know as a nurse, the demands on the NHS are increasing all the time. We recognise the work that the NHS staff do, but
nurses get paid less and less.
I agree with that. My wage slips from 2009 reflect exactly what I'm earning today. So how can that be fair in light of the job that we actually do?
And I recognise the job that you do, but there isn't a magic money tree that we can shake that suddenly provides for everything that people want.
3 weeks later.
The cost of the Conservatives doing a deal with the Democratic Unionist Party in order to govern was set out today. The taxpayer will be footing the bill to the tune of £1 billion in extra funding for Northern Ireland.
Arlene Foster's party only has 10 MPs, but that's what Theresa May needs to get votes through Parliament.
Gangster. If it's important to them, they'll find the money. 3 weeks after she went on Newsnight and made that bold statement, there is no magic money tree. This is in the lead up to the general election. And remember, this is pre-pandemic, pre-inflation, pre-Ukrainian war. So she and the Conservatives could stay in power. She suddenly pulled out $1 billion. $1 billion! They don't respect us. They respect power and money. And remember whose money it is. It's not their money, bro. It's our money. Is everybody perfect in the medical industry? No, of course not. But I do know if blame was a pie chart, we would have to say at least 3/4 of that pie chart is being thrown at the staff on the front line, as opposed to the actual villains of the piece, the government.
I managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve. Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
Just in case you're unaware, and I mean no disrespect with this statement, because we did not vote for said gentleman, but that was Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak happens to be our Prime Minister. Do you think that guy gives a fuck if someone dies? That is the mentality he has. He's like a magician. He's saying, look at this hand. Well, this hand's doing fuckery. But this hand's out in the open as well. I'll be real, Labour Party's shit at the moment as well. They've been shit for years. But one thing I can say about the Labour Party, they attempt to manage the country's money. All these issues we're having now, with the waiting time, missed appointments, the fines, the staff shortages, the new added guilt trip put on patients now that you have to decide when your leg's hanging off, is this really an emergency? Can I call 999? Maybe I should just call 111. I don't want to stress anybody out. All of this shit come under the Conservatives. The deficit we have now, trillions. Conservatives. Every time Labour Party come in, they address the deficit and they address social services. Our waiting times, I think our waiting times were like 4 hours when Labour were in, without 111 and all that crap. Now we're up to... We're up to some people not even being seen. Like, I keep stressing this 111 because they brought out 111 and they suddenly put the onus on us, made us feel guilty for requiring help. Is it really that bad? That's essentially what 111 is. Is it though? Is it though? And when you call it, how long does it take to actually get through to speak to someone? The general routine is you wait about 5 minutes roughly before you actually hear a human voice. 8 minutes by the time they've finished asking their questions like, what is your name? Now we start talking about symptoms. If it's not life-threatening, they'll say someone will call you back. That could be from an hour to 4 hours. By the time someone calls you back, an on-call doctor, they'll hear your symptoms and say, yeah, you should go to A&E. Bro, I could have done that 6 hours ago. And I'll just be halfway through my waiting time. That's the Conservative Party. Also, they can give their rich friends tax breaks. And as you heard Mr. Rishi Sunak, take away money from deprived areas. Who thinks like that? And these are the people demonising nurses. Nurses are the only hero in this story. Politicians are the villains, especially the Conservatives. We, as in when we're hurt, are the victims. The only people who are the heroes in this entire scenario are the NHS staff. And they get demonised the most. Just for wanting to live, whilst they're keeping us alive. That's irony.
Is joining us now, Education Secretary Gillian Keegan, also used to be Health Minister. Of course, thoughts on the nurses going on strike?
Gillian Keegan, Education Secretary. In this entire interview, how many reasons she gives for the issues we're in, how many times she uses the word inflation without once acknowledging absolutely any culpability on behalf of her party, who have been in power for the last 11 years. And on top of that, the only solution she offered up on behalf of the government was for nurses to just shush and accept where they are.
Well, of course, nobody wants the nurses to go on strike, and we would urge the nurses not to go on strike. We are recovering from the pandemic, and we really, really need our nurses right now. Everybody really needs our healthcare system. You know, we know we've got millions of people waiting for catch-up operations and scans and treatments. So...
No shit, Sherlock. I love how she's pointing out all the results and the shortcomings and Conservative policies over the last 11 years and using that as a justification for asking nurses not to want better pay. Without actually saying it, they're saying, I know we fucked you up, but if you go on strike, it's just going to fuck up even more. So why don't you just accept our fuck up and just... we'll call it quits.
We very much hope that, discussions will continue, but we very much hope that they don't go on strike. But of course, it's not just the nurses. We've seen many other people balloting for strike as well, including teachers and postal workers, and many others are balloting for strike action. And
yet still no culpability on behalf of the Conservative Party, even though she's blatantly saying all parts of the social infrastructure are at crisis point.
You know, we understand why, because of course, inflation is infecting everybody.
Inflation? For the last 11 years? Inflation? That's a new one. Oh, by the way, she's wearing a 10-gram Rolex watch while she's giving this speech.
It's impacting every business, every organisation, every household. That's what we're seeing. Everybody's seeing it. Everybody's uncertain about their futures, what's going to happen to mortgage rates, etc. So we do understand why it's difficult. But there's a key message, I think, Kay, which is you cannot spend your way out of inflation. You really can't. And the number one thing we have to do is tackle inflation. Otherwise, whatever we do, it will all be eaten up by inflation.
It's come from the same people who literally just almost bankrupted us with that mini budget.
Did you clap for nurses during the pandemic?
Of course, everyone did, yes.
So are you comfortable that they're now using food banks in order to be able to survive?
Well, I mean, I go to my food banks quite a lot.
Hopefully not wearing that watch.
And ask, why is it? What is it? What's the reason why people are there at food banks?
All right, let's hear this spark of genius.
And quite often, when you go to food banks, it will be people, something will have happened. Something will have broken down, either a relationship or a boiler or anything. They're usually there in an emergency situation.
Does that sound like somebody who's grasping the reality of the world we live in? They're usually there in an emergency, as if to say people might go there voluntarily because they like the offers they have on. This is the Education Secretary.
I know there was a lot of focus on increasing the starting salary for nurses. There was a lot of focus on making sure that lower paid people in the nursing profession were also increased. But, you know, there's no doubt that people are worried, very worried about inflation.
How many times has she said inflation so far?
Do you think nurses get paid enough?
Well, I think the average when I last looked was 34,000 before these increases. So it's, you know, it's more than the, you know, the average salary of across the country.
Okay, so it's for you. The amount of work you have to do to get to that stage, the amount of years you have to do to get to that stage, the amount of sacrifice you have to do to get to that stage, which is why Mrs. Keegan chose that specific point. You have him No.
I last looked was 34,000 before these increases. So it's, you know, it's...
I've noticed this, like, since your comment, I was having a look, and when I typed up, because I knew already, but I needed to confirm, because he was hitting me with, like, oh, get your facts kind of toned-ish a little bit. So it's like, I was having a look, and the first couple sites, it was like, rah, yeah, this pay looks decent. Again, it's all manipulation, and I hate to sound conspiratorial, but when you got down to like the third or fourth website, reality is band 5 brings you in at the national average of 27,000. But to be band 5, you have to have minimum 2 years experience. And the types of roles are podiatrist, learning disability nurse, radiographer. And you can't get a pay rise for 2 to 4 years. And the pay rise is only £2,000. 4-year wait for a £2,000 pay rise. And then the maximum you can get is 32. Everything else is downhill from there. Band 6, 33 grand. Experienced paramedic, health records manager, clinical psychology trainee, biomedical scientist, way above nurse grade. So it's all misrepresentation of the facts. If we scroll down to the staff that we're more likely to have day-to-day interactions with, already we've dropped right down, just one band down, we're looking at 23,000 for a pharmacy technician, a dental nurse, theatre support worker. This is what I wanted to show you. Check this, right? If you're ever in a touch wood for you, but forbid you're ever in surgery, I assume you want happy theatre support workers in the room, and as many as possible to make sure nothing goes wrong. Regardless what the procedure is, your life is literally in somebody else's hands. So let's keep them happy, let's make them feel worthy, etc., etc. Just to emphasize how backwards our morals are. You can get 9 theatre support workers to keep you alive in surgery for 1 Miss Keegan. And that's not including her wages. That was just expenses for Miss Keegan. To keep that politician explaining that people use food banks in an emergency. For one of her, just expenses, you'll get 9 theatre support workers.
But, you know, in some ways you can never say nurses get paid enough. They're so valuable.
Another classic Tory gaslight. You can never say they earn enough. The cheek of that statement when you clearly know you underpay them.
But I mean, my nephew's just had an 11-hour surgery.
Let's hear this little, I'm just like you.
Night before last. You know, there is no way anybody who's in that situation can underestimate just how important nurses and doctors are. I mean, they are literally a lifeline to many people.
So we should be paying them more?
Well, we pay them.
Yes, they are the greatest people. They keep us alive. So we should pay them more. Well, I mean, we pay them. Was that not the best answer? We pay them. We pay them. If someone says we should pay them more, because they're underpaid, we should pay them more. And the government official, the government mouthpiece, responds with, we pay them. Is that not just one step up from not paying them?
Obviously, there's the independent review bodies. There's 1.3 million people work in the NHS. So, you know, and it's obviously public sector. So you've got to get the balance between, you know, how much you pay. It's a huge bill. It's a huge cost, the NHS. And you've got to get the balance right because, of course, it's taxpayers who have to pay that bill.
I just made a hoop just with my hand. But yeah, I can never do it deliberately. Yo, the NHS literally keeps us alive. It's taxpayers' money. We're not talking about a luxury here. That's how they see it. They genuinely see the NHS as a luxury. And she also said there's over 1 million staff. And yet we're still understaffed. How is she using that as an example of, oh, we got to balance the books? That's an example of how much we need. How much help we need. It's why we got to have these conversations, man, because Conservatives are taking a piss. They're taking a piss. They're not even trying to make sense anymore. They act like they've just come into power when they've been in power for 11 years. And look how they just gaslighted us all the way through. Yeah, clap for the nurses, bro. I did it once just because I wanted my neighbours to see that I cared, even though I obviously care. But, you know, aesthetics and all that. So I did it once. But when I heard that bullshit, bro, I was like, what the fuck is this? What the fuck is this? And when she was talking about the magic money tree at that last election in 2017, that was 2 weeks or 3 weeks after Grenfell, you know? And when they voted to keep the pay cap at 1%, just after praising the heroism of all the firefighters, the police and the hospital staff, the paramedics, 2 weeks later, they had a vote on public sector pay cap that Labour brought to the table. Even though Labour weren't in power, Labour brought it to the table. We need to give our public sector workers more than 1%. Inflation is considerably more. We need to give them more. Conservatives are in power. Every single Conservative voted against it, including the DUP. They used our £1 billion to get DUP on side, to tell public sector to go suck your mum, and then had the audacity, this is the bit that really fucked me up, they had the audacity to stand up in Parliament and fucking cheer, bruv. Cheered. These times, they hadn't even found all the bodies in Grenfell. And those fuckers are standing in Parliament cheering. Public sector workers won't get a pay rise that matches inflation. Inflation. Bro, they're despicable. They are despicable. And they try and use all this cultural shit against us. And this isn't to get all emotional, whatever. But you did reference nurses being on TikTok dancing and all that. And I found that a bit of a strange comment. I guess I found that kind of obviously you're entitled to your opinion. I just found that a bit harsh, shall we say, because again, using anecdotal evidence, the amount of time we spent on paediatric wards, just as a parent on the ward, obviously it's mad stress watching your child. You can't help. There is nothing like it. But once you get to the stage where you're into remission and you're in the final stretch, the last week, getting ready to go home, you can start acknowledging your surroundings more. And my daughter does this as well. Let me see some of the suffering children with shaved heads, with the biggest scars you can imagine. They're always smiling, you know. They try. The children try. But the reason why I say that is because my daughter's humble enough to know that she has a very fucked situation. It's horrible. Because we spend such vast time in hospital, we're constantly confronted with that old cliche, it could be worse. We're literally confronted with that all the time. Sometimes we've had bad days where the stress is just much. She's just internally having a really bad day. And then she'll see someone and see them so happy. And yet they're fixed up to every machine imaginable. And you can see within herself, she's like, all right, cool. It's very humbling. Now, I say all this not because of the patients. I say all this because of the nurses. The amount of time they spend around these people, adults or children. It's hard to watch anybody suffering. It's hard to watch anybody in physical, mental pain. And the longer they're in hospital, the more of a connection, a bond you create with them. Not everybody goes home. Not everybody has a happy ending. Just that in itself is a massive task to undertake. Most people can't do that. Speaking to one nurse, we was in A&E a couple of weeks ago, and one of the play workers was down there. We know her from upstairs. She always makes a beeline for us, like, because it's been years. Like, you get really close. That's what I'm saying. You get really close. They know so much about us. So she come over and was chatting. She was saying hi to her. Like, she always tries to cheer Shan up straight away. But Shan's never in a bad mood when we get there or anything. But that's just in her. She just tries to be joyous around the children. But she was in A&E, and I had noticed. So I asked, how comes you down here? And she said, she was real with me. She said, I needed a change. All these kids kept coming in, and she was there for years. These kids kept coming in, and not every one of them left. And it was getting to her. And she said she found a note in her desk, something from a child she'd got close with a couple of years previously, and that child had died. And in fact, I think that child had some sort of plaque on the wall or something. And she said the letter was saying something about when I get home or something like that. And she said after seeing that, she goes, I need a break from this. She transferred to A&E to give herself a mental break. So she's still trying to cheer the children up, but she doesn't have that long-winded connection. After they leave A&E, in theory, she doesn't know what happens. So it's not as draining on her. I felt her when she said that. Fuck that. I will cry if someone's crying in front of me. That's how pussified I am. I can't deal with people's emotions. I can't. I'm too soft like that. Like, I felt so much guilt in there, seeing various different children. Maybe it's easier on the adult wards if people are grumpy and whatever else. But on the paediatric wards especially, even if the parents are grumpy, the child's still there and the child still needs your help. So you just have to take that, and you know what they're saying is true. You just know that you're not necessarily to blame, but the parent is also right and justified to be upset. Everyone is in that situation. The only difference is the nurse has to keep going back there for 12 hours a day, knowing that another parent and another parent and another parent. I've been guilty of it myself. Not like abusive, but levels of frustration constantly. And especially, again, because my daughter, one of her conditions is proper mad rare, so even though she'll be in one hospital, she's actually under the care of Great Ormond Street. As a parent, it just feels like, fuck's sake, We're just waiting for you to contact them, for them to make up their mind, to come back to them. And it's just like, as a parent, it's so frustrating. We can all get frustrated. But the nurses and doctors genuinely are trying to be and are the heroes in this situation. And they're also on the front line, dealing with everyone's emotions as well as their own emotions. For complete lack of pay. Whereas people I found use food banks in an emergency. She claimed £220,000 in expenses. Our priorities are the wrong way. She did say one thing right though, even though she was trying to gaslight it all. We could never pay health professionals enough, the way I see it. Same as education. We can never pay teachers enough. I'll just finish on the fact that education is essentially an extension of evolution. It's an extension of reproduction. Reproduction is the passing on of genetic information that you've collected, your ancestors have collected, and you pass on to your children and they'll pass it on. Education is just a real world version of that. We've gained all this information from human existence up until now. And we're trying to pass it on to the next generation so the future will be even better. With that kind of responsibility deserves a reward, no? Again, using personal anecdotal evidence. When my daughter started secondary school, year 7, the first year of it, one of the subjects, she didn't have a teacher the entire year. She had substitute teachers the entire year and halfway into the next year. Anyway, I'll tackle the Shamima conversation on another video. And I hope you stayed with me. I'd love to hear back from you. If you disagree with anything. And I hope I didn't cause any offense. That's why I put this on today.